All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Debate Boutique Student Demos. It's been a cool little second since we last posted, and it's not streamed, so it's a little different all around. And as you can tell, we done elevated up, and we got the backgrounds going. So welcome to the boutique, you know, fancy style, bougie style. But super excited to announce this demo debate from our students versus the pros, and in this case, the pro. Caitlan has taken on the daunting task of being the affirmative, and so we're super excited about that. Quick things about Debate Boutique is that this is what you can expect if you were to sign up for our August Boutique Burner. Jasmine, we've watched the videos from all the way ago. You talking about that? I know. That's because the Boutique Burner is less than 3 weeks away. And you should sign up if you want to have opportunities to debate people like myself, Caitlan. We have a whole bunch of new faces who are about to enter. Yeah, clap it up. A lot of new faces who are offering themselves to not only debate against you, but to workshop with you and explain why it is they're putting together the strategies that they're doing versus your argument, and that you can test and think through some of your arguments, as well as building some of the, not file creation, but building some kind of card research analysis that works with the big debates. Every debate is a big debate, is a wild concept to really pull you into the best version of the debater that you already are. With that being said, I'm going to stop rambling. Registration deadline for that, though, is August 5th. So do the right thing. Do what the good world would do, and sign up for Debate Boutique, August Boutique Burner. But you came here to watch the student demo. On the affirmative is Caitlan, who will be reading Defund the Police. And on the negative, we have a very interesting and fun concoction of wake work by Karthik and Raunak. And so without further ado, I'm going to see y'all at the end, and we are going to see this debate. Yay, we love debate here at Debate Boutique. Woo!
Yay, debate. Thank you, Jasmine, for that wonderful intro. All right, I believe the 1AC has been sent out. Thank you, Kiara. Is everyone ready to begin? Raunak, are you there? You turned into just pure background. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm sitting down, so I'm like, yeah.
Sounds good. All right, let me put my timer. All right. The advantage is policing. Movements are working at the local level for justice reinvestment. That means defunding police and reallocating resources to community service. That's Lytle Hernandez at 20. Defending the police is part of history around justice reinvestment. We want to think of restricting the budget for police and divert those funds to school, housing, employment, and to mental health services. Law enforcement are taking up larger shares of local budgets. The criminal justice system is completely localized to a larger degree. The mass mobilization across the country now have the capacity and power to reinforce change at the local level. It's a movement to communities control their public safety regimes. And some local defunding is inevitable as protest movements win. But unless those reforms deepen, current defunding will cause shifts to predatory policing. That's Crockett and Earl at 20. Minneapolis is taking steps to disband its police. Los Angeles endorsed cutting the police department's budget by more than $133 million. Leaving New York officials agreed to ship $1 billion. And more activists now look to all sorts of police funding, in which ones are most predatory to Black, Indigenous people of color. What seems to win for the movement to turn upside down fast. A singular moment of focus on slashing local police budget. Policing share might increase the reliance on predatory ways to make up the budget shortfalls. Most departments can generate revenue by just policing traffic stops and other routine interactions to be predatory taxes for generating revenue. Civil asset forfeiture allows the law enforcement to seize cash and property. This is systemic issue. Cities to split the revenues derived from predatory policing taxes, police cutting, policing charge made between the revenue, modest cuts made, encourage departments to generate their own revenue by increasing face-to-face contests in communities that are over police. Defunding police should involve abolishing civil asset forfeiture programs. Defunding police is necessary to transform over police society. Activists will need to turn to address all revenue spigots as part of a broad defunding plan. And without police defunding, localities will face widespread community disadvantage to maintain police budgets. That's Covert and 20 out of the movement has come in search for organizing to push city council to shift money out of the bloated police budgets and into social services. Activists are seeing success is unprecedented. State and local budgets are being decimated by a drop in tax revenues. They'll be forced to make deep cuts and keeping spending on the police and tax rate. Increasing it will mean brutal reductions elsewhere. The crisis increase the need for various services on the chopping block. And federal funding is key. There's 4 words. First, it undermines local budgetary accountability. This distortion in incentives means that the current approaches will result in massive increases of police funding. That's Harmon and Weaver. 20. The federal government contributes billions for local law enforcement programs, subsidized and incentivized intrusive and harmful policing, surveillance, and military equipment. The government can provide strong incentive for free money to engage in intrusive policing. The local civilian political process has to sign up on the policing. The agency wants to the way they funded this, so they sign up on the local budget process process these programs empower the chiefs by making them source of local dollars and to bypass the ways of holding police accountable. It's inevitable, invisible that police will, it's getting outside the dollars and the truth of policing. People will continue the protest against police brutality. If there's one parallel protest during the 1960s and force sparked immediately because of police brutality. In the immediate aftermath, we expanded police power, we doubled it. Fast forward to 90s, uprising around Rodney King, we expanded funding. Fast forward to Ferguson, many cities expanded funding to it allows local police to become self-sustaining and achieve budgetary independence from local governance. That's Harmon. And 15, funds come from local governments. They budgets provide the crucial form of political control over departments over which federal programs disrupt. When federal programs provide funding, equipment, and power, they give local departments the means to secure resources without the local check. This programs permit agencies to request equipment outside of the local government standard budget process without civilian approval. Local officials are not involved. The general public is unaware. Federal law enforcement is giving the local departments resources directly to divert critical community input and from local police activities at 80% of personnel costs. Federal programs provide salaries for officers. They result in free officers engaged in the most intrusive activities from local budgetary scrutiny. The consequences to reduce local police and dependence on local funding for their personnel and non-personnel costs include weapons and equipment and material and supplies. That 1033 permits the transfer of vehicles, body armor, surveillance, and communication equipment directly to police departments. The equitable sharing program is designed to subsidize the use of force and covert policing, precisely when local governments decline to support the federal programs. The operational costs of local resources when asset for future funds are used to pay these costs. The task force are well, I think just close out. Our task force are effectively self-sustaining. 3, it sends a political symbol that orients all policing towards coercion and insulates local politics from movement prejudice. Harmon. And 15, federal policing incentivize more harmful policing techniques involve billions of years. Each year across federal agencies gave $2.8 billion for police protection. Most went to local governments. The federal government now gives millions, such as $1.7 billion for terrorism prevention magnitude. Appears when greater when federal public safety programs are contrasted with federal civilian rights programs on policing from JAG grants to 1033 to Homeland Security communicate a federal message about policing that favors coercion. The public must be able to monitor and attribute responsibility for the harm the police do. The federal programs undermine these preconditions. Use of force, invasion, privacy, arrest, and stops are challenged by the public. The public officials respond by pushing for change. Local citizens use political process to change policies or city leadership, improve officer training policies and oversight, and reduce practices that impose harm. Local governments are responsible to the public concerned about public coercion or police coercion when individual instances of widespread practices lead to strong public backlash. Just could serve as a channel for democratic control over police practices. Serve major federal programs that designed in ways that undermine the system. 4, it massively expands police violence to crush protests as shake. And 20, the billions worth of military equipment has been transferred to civilian departments, has led to militarization of policing. It is commonly seen in mine-resistant ambush protective vehicle response to protests. Trump reversed the Obama administration's restrictions. There is a positive and statistically significant relationship between 1033 transfers of fatalities from officer-involved shootings. The more militarized law enforcement agents become, the more likely officers are to use lethal violence. Civilian deaths have found to be increased by 130% when police acquire more military equipment. More protests have somewhat convenient law and order for pretexts to occupy American streets. Policing responses to protests being seen understood as a result of law enforcement agencies' preparation to act as paramilitary force in public space to redefine its war zone. The federal government could step in to stop militarization at its source. Black Lives Matter is calling for defunding of national police forces, but their work of disarming law enforcement will have to take place at the local level, and the impact is systemic racial subjugation and mass incarceration. Only defunding can respond to pervasive policing tactics in Black communities. Hanford and 16, the mass incarceration concentrated along the race to preventive policing and prosecutors, racial targeting, community policing is central, which is support broken window policing, mass incarceration, and anti-Black state police violence. The racially targeted jailing, killing, and attempts to force Black people into submission through the use of violent state power must and orders enforced to do violence under policing. Population may be witnessed to terrorize, search, and interrogated. The community policing educates hotspot policing for targeting low-income areas where people of color reside in. Tells zero tolerance, which resides in criminalization of minor violations. Two-door surveys become excuses for warrantless searches. Child registration programs become tools for intimidation. Meetings with handpicked civic and religious leaders become opportunities to gain community buy-in to conservative ideals. Community member support. Law enforcement helping the state to co-opt the community as assets and resources that would otherwise be useful for resistant penetration. Community life becomes more effective means that's really controlled by the state, and anti-Black terrorism outweighs as Spencer and Parlow at 18. The extreme brutality has been unleashed by white actors on people of color employed to capture violence and terrorism, such genocide, Holocaust, cruel and unusual punishment, sexual assault, torture, lynching, state-sponsored terrorism, the consular colonialism, American chattel slavery, apartheid, mass incarceration, anti-Black racism at the core of white supremacy. The injustice that system has served malevolent force of social control in the interest of white supremacy, white domestic and state terrorists killed more people, have done more harm to any other form of terrorism. Thousands of Black people have been beaten to death in back rooms of sheriff's offices and cells in county jails. The BIE classification was developed at the same time when militarized police were riding in armored tanks, flying drones overhead, firing concussion grenades, pointing military-grade semi-automatic weapons. The collateral gems of militarized police fighting these wars with imagined enemies and mass incarceration of Black and brown bodies. The carceral state relies on unrestrained state power, the criminalization and repression of people of color, and disenfranchisement, dispossession, exploitation of poverty, and militarization on physical, structural, and spiritual violence. As activists, we must continue to build on abolitionist practices to challenge the carceral state. Thus, the plan, the United States Federal Government should enact substantial divestment of policing in the United States, solvency, federal investment in policing is catalyst for larger movement demands and reallocating resources in disenfranchised communities. Bennett and 20 recognition of devastation for over-policing, over-criminalization warrants real meaningful change that is divestiture look like the end of 1033 and end of cops, grants police and schools prohibiting JAG dollars from being used to continue low-level arrests of the drug war and destruction of black and brown communities. The federal government must get out of the business of funding, arresting, incarcerating. Now is the time for disinvestment, and the plan is an imagination of how to realize the vision for Black lives while it uses the law, it rejects the law as is. That's AFFAR and 18, the most imaginative voice within the racial justice movements that are fighting for more movement that focus on shifting power to Black and marginalized communities, shifting the space for governance, and now reserved for policing, surveillance, mass incarceration, and transforming the relationship on state, market, and society. Movement actors have made policy proposals and engaged in law reform campaigns. At the same time, they've prominently contested law and politics as usual. But it would be wrong to think the movement has given up on the law. The movement is not attempting to operate outside the law, but to reimagine its possibilities within the broader attempt to reimagine the law. Law is fundamental to movement. Actors are fighting activists for visions, reimagine a policing supporting a decarceral agenda rooted in abolition, imagination, shrinking policing, surveillance, and incarceration, shifting resources away. The movement offers transformative, affirmative visions for change. DOJ could have taken the approach for reform in line with more the vision. The racial justice movement are working to build another state world. They are aiming to use the law as a tool to build the alternative future. The primary committed thought to lodge legitimacy. It is to the people the motivation to protest and enduring state of social structures. The vision for Black lives reorgs violence and inequality around constitutive aspects of policing that cannot be fixed with traditional approaches to law reform. The vision seeks structural reform that moves beyond constitutional rights instead of striving for improved police. The vision improves reducing the large social and fiscal footprint and shifting its resources elsewhere. The vision expands far beyond the flame of police violence and criminal justice. The interlocking state as current and historical systems propel and draw from anti-Black racism. This political vision measure is an ethical commitment. Mark ethical commitment.
Did you get through it?
I'm so slow. I'm so old.
For this activity, y'all, we're gonna let Caitlin have the entirety of the air.
Appreciate you.
Caitlin, you good for cross?
Yep.
Cool. I'm just getting out the timer. Okay, everyone good? I guess my first question is going to be on the Akbar evidence. It says, quote...
which piece? Sorry.
It's the second piece of Akbar evidence, the one that's tagged with divestment. It says, quote, does not call for the outright abolition of police. Why is engaging with police good, or why is maintaining systems of policing good?
The first line is, this is a call for abolition of the police and other punitive systems of social.
Well, no. The card goes on to say this does not call for the abolition of police. So
yeah, and it's not just a call for the abolition of police. It is a call for the abolition of police and other punitive systems of social control.
Well, what then is a punitive system of social control?
We argue that the idea that retributive punishment is necessary for quote-unquote community safety or harmony is something that should be rejected and is fundamentally ingrained with the ideas of the federal government investing in policing as the way to quote-unquote maintain law and order.
Well, why isn't that inevitable? Like, why isn't law and order and policing just happen on a local level then?
Because we've made the argument that local levels can only sustain the levels of community policing and surveillance if they have federal resources being granted them, not only financially, but also because the only way that police have the literal technology and capacity to do these things is through programs like 1033, JAG funds, no lack of oversight from local police, the ability to kind of fully divest themselves from community oversight because they can just rely on federal funds a whole bunch.
Right, so I guess the AF causes a shift to community oversight. What does that look like?
Like the members of the community, so like not like, you know, like city councils or whatever, that's part of it, but like mostly the members of the community who are like filing reports against the police that are like, hey, these people should be fired, whatever. The cities and cities and those who fund them, so like the localities associated with that, so the councils can divest themselves from it without fearing that they will just turn and use federal funds to engage in things like civil asset forfeiture.
Right. Wait. For two questions. First is, why is that not a double turn with your Hansford evidence that indicates that community policing, in the exact scenario that you explained it, is the way that systemic racial subjugation and a new form of broken windows policing, mass incarceration, anti-Black state violence continues?
You're confusing terms. Community policing in that phrase refers to the active presence of police in communities. Our argument is community oversight over police, which is
No. It's in the context of like review boards and saying things that giving community oversight over the police.
It's about community policing that are accountable to internal review boards in police unions, which is distinct from the communities deciding where police should be, what tools they should have, what are they useful for, should they respond to all kind of social problems.
which part of the evidence do you think substantiates that?
That's just a term difference. Like that, what that card is describing is community policing.
The
like
card
defined,
defines community policing in the context of who we're explaining it. Okay.
Yeah, it's defined as like the active presence of police in communities. That's just like a technical term in the literature.
Okay, you're good. You good?
All right. No prep needed. Is everybody good?
You want to send it out, Karthik?
Yeah.
Are y'all doing an email chain? Because I didn't get one. Or is it just a Discord?
I just sent it in the Zoom.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see it. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Just give me a second here. All right. I sent it.
Is it meant to be labeled 2 in C, but it's the 1 in C?
Oh, that's my bad.
No, that's the 2 and C.
Sorry, my bad.
Breaking the fourth wall. We've planned this debate out all the way to the 2 and C for everyone watching.
All right, I should have sent it. Has everybody got it? I just sent in the chat.
You might see my cat like fly through the background. He just has the zoomies, so apologize in advance.
All right. Cool. Everybody's good. So yeah, it's just one-off case. Caitlin, Kiara, are you guys ready? All right, cool. Meet the abuser. The United States justice system, following the typical traits of all abusers, isolates, entangles, and attracts. Filter the reform rate through the overall trajectory rather than the instance. It's the abuser's logic to bring home a flower only through submitting to the structural claim to the conditions for liberation of people study at 15. When supremacy is positive trafficking is victim within racialized cycles of abuse, its system must appear in varying forms, co-opting the images of freedom, concealed races, bring up to white supremacy, has always read anti-blackness for its political campaigns, political policy reform, isolating victims from support networks, entangling the victims in self-doubt, and involuntary dependence, and trap their victims by building an illusion chains to commit abuse, and with a gun in one hand and a flower in the other. Humanity becomes dependent on racializing violence, the construct of self-righteous, the broken promises, beating, manifesting themselves in overtly abusive measures of control through slavery and genocide, followed by honeymoon, named reconstruction. Embedded is the warning that slavery could reemerge if his victim does not follow from I. If he is connected of a kind, mirrored every time an abuser comes home with flower to atone for his violence. During Reconstruction, whiteness immersion, the KKK, and white police enforcement lynching. So honeymoon Civil Rights Act afterward coined till pro. The war on drugs, privatized prisons were revived. Prison labor entered the stock exchange. The justice system emerged to carry the beatings of slavery and Jim Crow performed where it resistance. Today, endorsed police murders of black people confronted with ghosted words, historic antecedents, the underpinning institution for white modernity, and as generations of white supremacy's abusive institutionalized beating arises, is only through understanding what colonial cycles of abuse can transcend those exploitative explanations, crime segregation of slavery, and inevitability of black indigenous myth, death mirror, and the progression of white supremacists. Like the first step is exiting an abusive relationship that required the abuse to see, must recognize the abuses to continue abusing, and defunding the police is the latest step in the expansion of anti-blackness that mystifies orientations against systems of policy that necessitate greater polarization of blackness. That's Mona and Harney 20. We're not going to go stay here and over, but defunding the police take care of policy generally, because police kills more black folk. The police are just policy. A black person never not died of anti-blackness is not only before and against the police, but metaphysical foundations of the police. The question, because what we can do with that, is it possible to want something other than that? And the question is not empty without an answer. And there's an archivism dissent. Their cherry picking of the archive is a move to pornographic fungibility. That's the beginning of 19. How easily BLM can be structured against the service of other people, struggle for liberation, structural adjustment, manifests as a diversion around structural negation of blackness is policy reform. The depth of black women work while fighting for the women does not reciprocate solidarity for black causes, yet somehow has still been transformative cultural icon, highlights the ritualistic enactment of this anti-Black religion and the force of the iconoclastic negativity and counterintuitively generated Black resistance. Icon loads Blacks and non-Blacks alike into a pacified state of celebration and optimism through a narrative of geographical progress and feel-good politics, so that you want to become icons ourselves. Icons take on lives of their own that transcend the original intentions of those who created the movement. Is misremembered to bolster our perspective of social movements, narratives to raise the more radical factions of the movement by reducing everything prophetic to individual terror of heroism, e.g. Dr. King, ultimate narrative of American progress. BLM as icon has also fallen victim to the iconography that the movement was originally attempting to escape, and the alternative is the refusal of the 1AC that aligns itself with the analytic for wake work. Sharp 16, Blacks of the slavery get wedged in partial to the archive, expected to discard, jettison, and measure these ways of knowing and act epistemic violence through his legislative meaning, adhering to research method, drafting service of larger district for regarding was method to research and teaching, entering the racial calculus, political education that will encourage background knowledge and scientific method, a method along the lines of saying with the gathering, tracking phenomena of disproportionately devastatingly affect Black people, read through a new analytic weak work in access of the fictions of the archive, rather than seeking a resolution to ongoing and irresolvable abjection project looks what survives this exclusion is ontological negation, the aesthetically impossibility of such resolution safely persists as an issue in the political life. Black lives are still in peril and developed by a racial calculus and political arithmetic. Black people weaponize sidewalks and shoot themselves while handcuffed from the narratives of danger and disaster. All weaponized Black bodies. The white liberal imagination feel temporarily bad about Black suffering. There's really no motive empathy can replicate a lot of UC Cliff for simply being back in the midst of Black life as approximative and it was attempted physical, social, and figurative might look like wake work. And case, the Afghan sold alerts whether their offense have no internal link to the reinvestment of funds. They obviously can't fiat it because it falls outside the bounds of policing. That's what we get 20. Even if you open the question about political vacuum, will be felt a very reforms and budget cuts are limited after marches Peter easily versus local government or extreme pressure to cut across the board. Money freed up by cuts to police budget and matching in ether. And no local defunding not inevitable. The evidence cites examples of how in the scope states have decreased their funding, but not made a predictive claim that's going to continue, especially proven by lack of media attention now. And their harm and evidence as it allows local police to become self-sustaining and achieve budgetary independence from local governance, which proves that if anything, they quell demands for local defunding and move towards sustaining local policing. And the act causes a shift to predatory policing. They can't solve things like civil asset forfeiture, which means that the weekend losing funding, cops double down on abusive practice of recoup funds. That's when I see Crockett in Earl 20. Defund the police has gone mainstream. Officers must learn all sorts of police funding. A wind turned upside down. Slashing police budget might increase their reliance on predatory ways to make for a budget shortfalls, generate revenue just by policing. For example, Missouri, NIC, traffic routine, police interaction generating revenue laws. Law enforcement has seen cast and private property on the suspicion they may have been involved in a crime. Budget squeeze the revenue balloon at one end, forcing pressure at the other. Activists should limit the ability of law enforcement to generate revenue through policing activity. And they have straight up impact turned themselves. They said they cause a move to community policing, and that's bad. As Hamper 16, decision is the racialized killing by the state. Alarming decision has not been since Ferguson. Extrajudicial killings have right. There's a community policing, community control, and police de-escalation. Community policing is essentially supported broken windows policing, mass incarceration, and anti-Black state violence. A desire to return to the opposite friendly community policing strikes definitely democratic, authentic community feeling dismembered by policing. The police insert themselves in the vacuum of uncertainty to generate a community of their own image, generating legit only the groups that conform to the state conception of law and order. Police decide to whom they will listen. It's the color low gives them among the former prisoners. Omission invalidates claims to being authentically community-based. Community policing integrates broken windows and stop taxes and emphasis on promoting public order. The door-to-door service became exclusive for warrantless searches into the home's child registration programs. The one that took place at Mike Ryan's apartment after his murder became just for intimidation meeting. Sites for propaganda police are rewarded for making risk. Prosecutors rewarded for convictions of longer sentences. Community members helping the state to co-opt community assets in the face of resistance. Mass free education may be a smart, repressive reward. So suggestive joy. Police better take it in perpetrating violence. Seek to work in the Black community because they have more fun there. And police unions ensure the plan gets circumvented as Relburn and Mid 625. Quite successful federal lobbying campaign by law enforcement organizations, groups of selling the option on Capitol Hill in the recent week. The units fought aggressively. The crowd in Washington and raiders new federal mandates. Republicans rejected most aggressive message. Democrats have to calculate legislation not even worth debating. Ross lawmakers refused to embrace changes until they received insurance for law enforcement groups. Powerful police organizations have risen to call for interchanges even after the protest of 2015. Members of both political parties fear alienating them and being portrayed as soft crime. Law enforcement groups fought for exchanges by civil rights groups with Democrats seen adjustments from law enforcement as ways to emphasize their law and order credentials. And private policing localities will just hire private security, said that's Russian Wachowski 20. Another impact of defunding is the shifting of private security forces into public safety when local governments do not adequately invest. Wealthy residents fill in this gap by investing in private security loses poor residents, communities of color undeserved. Private policing in the face of underfunding exacerbates inequality based on socioeconomic status. Private officers are poorly trained and regulated.
How much time do you have, Karthik?
I have a minute left.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a card. I'll look in the Google Doc.
Okay.
We read red.
Okay. Okay. All causes on goes to 20. Private-public partnerships that seek to predict crime with a racially based algorithm and justify perpetual expansion of the race police budget and causes surveillance and patrolling of communities even when there is no crime being committed, undermine the power of police unions, but also in civil asset forfeiture program and predatory fines fees and overtaking taking police out of our schools, as well as cutting ties between them and universities, community governments, how schools themselves are run must change, namely how punishments like suspension and expulsion, which disproportionately affect non-white students, make schools function like more like pipelines to pursue that types of education. We almost decriminalize survival, whether it be sex trade, drug trades, or in street economics or statutes that criminalize homelessness, almost criminalize people under failure to protect us, and punish following to report abuse of your child, even if you're being abused as well. Autonomy of police or unions and prison industrial complex. All right, I think that's it. Yep. Open for cross.
Yeah, let me just pull up a timer.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you good?
Caitlin, do you want me to send the rehighlighting?
Yeah, but it's fine. It can wait till.
Yeah,
you can send it during cross-acts. Yep.
Cool.
All right, good.
I'm good. Mm-hmm.
First question is on this piece of Salehana evidence.
Mm-hmm.
How does white supremacy kind of entrap its victims in a Ponzi scheme? Like, how does that mechanism function?
Right, because what we see is that in the system, it builds illusions of change. So the first historical example cited was Reconstruction, kind of the system atoning for its sins of slavery.
My question's not about like examples of things. I'm like literally asking about the mechanism. How does it entrap individuals in these cycles of violence? Like there has to be something that initially captures
because
them.
it cuts off support networks.
What does that look like? What does it mean for the state to cut off support networks or white supremacy?
Quite literally, like over-policing.
Over-policing, okay.
Yeah, that's just one example.
It cites examples of things like COINTELPRO, the war on drugs, over-policing resulting in
those are all
prisons.
Mm-hmm.
The 1AC explicitly rejects all of those and divests the federal support from them. What's the link?
Incorrect. The Salehana evidence is specific to about the ways in which reformism functions. The argument is that there's an initial moment of violence, which is the act of abusing that our evidence indicates. But then
and it says the abuse it's followed by a honeymoon civil rights act, afterward followed by COINTELPRO, war on drugs, privatized prisons, whereby prison labor.
Our argument is that
reject those mechanisms. We prevent that policing. What is the link? Why is that a reform?
Our argument is that the affirmative is then that honeymoon period, which doesn't account for the way that post-app things will continue to will be recreated. I think a good example of this is about how we move from fugitive slave patrols to policing now, which is sort of the proof why even if we get rid of the institution of policing, they'll be switched to other methods.
We say the state should not invest in establishing safety for communities.
No, you say
policing.
Wrong.
Yeah, divest from policing. That's what it's defined by as our 1AC solvency evidence.
And our evidence says that it'll go in that divestment results in new forms of coercive control.
What are those forms? Like you've just said it results in them. Like what is it? You've then explained surveillance.
So I think
the state will always come up with new forms of exceptional violence.
Obviously, it's impossible to predict the specific modality of control, but we can take historical trends.
Yeah, there's enough precedent.
I want to shift gears. The archivism dissent, the 1AC explicitly follows the call from the Vision for Black Lives that says that we should start with defunding for the police as a gesture towards broader abolition. Why is that a cherry picking of black scholarship or movements?
Where does it say we have to start from the place of defunding the police? The evidence, that's just one out of 8.
Evidence says the broadest legal change that they are advocating for is defunding the police as a revitalization and activation for the further gestures towards abolition.
Wrong. If you search up the 8 different steps of the Black Vision of this collective, then you'll understand that it's just one sub-point of one category, and it's not even
it's the most useful for distributing resources and preventing.
No, they didn't. That's
have actively
arbitrary created by Akbar, who's like a legal scholar, so obviously he wants to justify why legalism is good.
All right.
Let me send it out really quick. I have to re-close out of it to send it to. All right, it was just sent. Let me pull it back up. Let me know when everyone is ready to begin.
Okay, I'm good.
Give me 1 second.
Take your time.
All right, yeah, I'm good.
All right, everyone. Jacqueline, you have it. Everyone else spectating good? All right, awesome. The order will be the case and then the critique. Federal funding drives militarization of local police forces. Federal money and equipment help police circumvent local government control, and only defunding police returns power to communities. A step towards politics of abolition. They've conceded all of this, which is necessary to be able to solve. Our evidence indicates it's the best way to stop the forms of anti-black policing and terrorism that happen widespread through their evidence. Our solid evidence also concedes this point. Cross-ex proves that all their reforms failing are always reinvestments in things like war on drugs, etc. If we divest from the idea of retributive policing and the need to be in communities that's able to solve, that's what divestment is. It's 20C. Evidence. Their first argument is reinvestment. It's about budget cuts that's distinct from full divestment. The plan solves by reusing the false charge. We'll read the Yellowstone Wiki. And 20, the process where ample sectors are dead absent decisive action by Congress. The most powerful force weighing on local police funding is the Republic Senate's refusal to consider emergency. They say no local defund. It's wrong. No ability to sustain current policing without the ability of the federal government to support it. That's proven by the piece of evidence I just read above. Current examples also fail because the federal support. Our 1AC evidence indicates that the reason that local communities are forced to make the choice to reinvest in policing is because they are dependent on the federal government for aid funds, and they condition that on the increase of police funds and being tough on crime, which only are move away from the federal government, and divestment from that signal is able to solve. It's also predictive about the fragile nature of police budgets. It argues that only federal support is the able way to sustain themselves. It also allows communities to do things like outlaw civil actions and torture that makes police accountable for their actions, which means they can't just go into people's homes and stuff. The communities will reject them. It's been forced into a false transfer budget proven by this wiki evidence. They say predatory policing, divestment, solve it, outlaws all of these mechanisms. It's a question of allowing communities the power to follow through without federal interference. That's the one I see internal links, mostly the harm in evidence. This evidence is also only about cutting a share of the budget, not fully divestment. It's a critique of things like A can't wait, not the app. We will insert the yellow evidence from the 1AC evidence. They say community policing, there's no link to it. It's a conflated term. We hash this out in cross. Like we said, we return control over policing to communities, not shift current police units to community policing practices. Only the app solves it because it removes decision making from the police, which is why community policing exists in the first place. They say police unions circumvent first durable fiat. We divest the federal government from the police means unions don't have power over decision making. Second, this card just says that there's no political will in the status quo. Obviously, that's why the app is inherent. They shift the burden of solvency too much. We shouldn't have to prove why the plan would happen in the status quo, just that it should. That's the only burden that we have to defend. They say private policing is non-unique. It happens in the status quo. Only a divestment from the signal that community policing and law and order are the way to be able to solve is crucial. That's the one I see evidence. The plan spills over to broader challenges to notions of community safety. That's the one I see AFFIR evidence. We are a gesture towards broader abolition to be able to solve. It's also not a reason to vote negative. Yes, racist people exist. We agree. It's a question about divesting massive federal support and military resource support in the police. It's 130% decrease in punitive violence. That's a good idea. The K framework, the role of the judges to weigh the fiat implementation of the plan against the competitive alternative must generate unique links to the plan text. The owl should be evaluated prior to the scope of solvency. We get to weigh the whole app prior to regards to prior questions. First is fairness. Prior questions are infinitely regressive because the net can choose any arbitrary standard of the block. And moves 1AC often sandbags. They want to artificially inflate their offense under their model. They can say debate is now a top chef competition, so we lose, proven by their scrapping for 1AC links. The second is the advocacy skills. Being and debating the consequences of the plan is necessary for shifting detailed clash and top education. Their model skirts these questions by shifting focus to abstract prior questions that are opportunity costs of the plan. Third is movement building. All movements must compare strategies, create blueprints, and evaluate trade-offs. Our interpretation produces the best model for compare and test tactics for resistance. Four is fiat is good and we get it. It's predictable to base on resolution and generates consequential forecasting, which we are forced to assess the broader consequences of the plan on a larger scale. It's best for clash and argument for which are only portable skills. It's fair con. And 18, an advocate framework must include comparison and evaluation of different arguments. Deliberation contribute to ethical critique by ensuring that arguments are considered and criticizing people and moderate their own partialities. Argumentation over what policy should be adopted does not exclude other forms of analysis, such as representation by substitutions of framework, provides an effective way of evaluating discourse within an ethical procedure for impartiality designed to filter out conclusions that would not ask questioning proposals or tested in light of their consequences. Framework can accommodate ethical issues in their broader consequentialist perspective. First, and for next is permutation. Do both. Next, permutation divest from the police and align with the analytical weight work projection. Part of the alt is forced textual competition, which proves a functional difference between the act of divestment and aligning with weight work. They can't double bind. Either alignment can overcome residual links to the app, or the alt is to a way to overcome ontological claim of the links, which means you should vote affirmative on presumption because we still do something materially. You should refuse a priori orientation towards pessimism or optimism, which places essence before lived existence. Judge actions based on the contingent ethical beliefs, not their ultimate ethical efficacy. Anti-black is not a closed system. Reading it as such ignores the inherent relationality. One is the same bad faith that anti-black racism requires to establish itself as legitimate and organized population in the first place. They complete the project of anti-blackness. Gordon and 18, bad faith attempts to hide through the shifting and orientation of the critique of form of cart before the horse was fetishized methods of being imposed a reality of the fallacy of pleasing as essence before existence of race. Continue to be studied in relation to what it made it race and required denying humanity of other groups of organization or reaching power than denying description of the human being to them in a form of formative contradictions that we first had to be identified as human beings in order to be denied it being as such dehumanization depend on particular idea of human beings commitment to elimination of relations leads to contradictions that should announce remain a white and black the world appear more close than it actually is. They offer personal social justice a relation outside of relation. No human beings really any of these things do black selfish social justice or relation to each other's way. But social must be premised on the attitudes of anti-black races. Why not suffer a city of power when how it came to us instead of assertion of ontological there's a logical paradox in virtue of ontological blackness to identify blackness. One must be in relation to it. This part looking beyond blackness, moving beyond the conception of meaning as singular fixed to the grammar of how meaning produce all human beings are manifestations of different dimensions of meaning. As the social world is manifestation of choice and relationship, one can be pessimistic about and ultimately is active forecasting what can only be meaningful and what's actually performed. Some actions or at least reflections of the commitment. Their first link the Salihana evidence. There's no abuse or metaphor. We aren't putting roses on the criminal justice system. Rather, we are completely divesting from its enforcement of brutality. This is in line with the calls of abolition in the black radical churches. That's the way to see Akbar, Bennett, Spencer, and Perla. Is to suggest anything else is just simply false. Returning control to local authorities works. Our evidence suggests allowing communities to determine what is a proper accountability is actually necessary to be able to solve it. Results in agential capacity. They have it backwards. System of racial subjugation perpetuate because the fundamentals of the system are weak and need reconstituted, not because it's ontologically enclosed. Kelly and 17. Not everything is about a response to white supremacy. Social formation may be structured and dollars not defined by any part of black radical churches and refusal to property, even to me. Human beings can be property given. White supremacy too much credit, street safely, trip code, massacre, and the same thing denies the specific distinctly historically specific in responses to the weakness of racial regime. Jim Crow was a response to black democratic obstruction of slavery. It's a huge gap between the end of Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow. 25 years of democratic possibility and struggle skin with mass incarceration upward. So he has a response to do in the 60s. If we don't acknowledge that, we end up thinking that white supremacy is an unchanged fix and so powerful we can't do anything about it. Supremacy is fragile, weak, and racial regimes always have shored themselves up because they're unstable system and give the impression it's so powerful yet it's working overtime to respond to opposition. The Moten link Asa point the phrase once you defund the police then you need to take care of policy. It sees divestment as a precondition for larger political change. Asa point Moten and Harney are indicting rollbacks of police reform like those that followed the 1962 LA riots, police militarization after Rodney King or Ferguson's increased budget after BLM mobilization. But it's not critical to note that rollback occurred because one, abolitionist movements were incapable of sustaining pressure on local police, which proves the alternative has no capacity to do so because it doesn't even challenge the legal system. And second, the federal government was always the one that provided extra support, meaning divestment is critical to today's protest. Lack of action to ensure that gains will be erased. And even if the police are a symptom of policy, we should try to confront both sources of violence simultaneously, making the act mutually enabling, not mutually exclusive. Discipline Akbar evidence assumes that when he sees Harney's larger orientation, the movement for Black Lives, landmark policy proposal, the vision synthesizes ethical political movements that demand structure will change and practice legislation that dismantles anti-black politics. Our second Akbar evidence, it recognizes the abolition is not immediate but incremental, beginning with federal divestment of the archives and decided it's not wrong. We don't cherry pick the vision for Black Lives. They advocate for defunding the police. They've been actively doing it on protest, which proves that they have a bad faith criticism of the 1AC. If we want our ontology answers, it denies these are prototrope in this Carter. And 13, even if prototrope production of blackness, there's a possibility existence does not organize its own coherence within the logic of ontology. Blackness are a force of raciality, a posture of critical uncertainty must be achieved. It cannot be assumed that such a motive exists far from being trapped in social potentialities of flesh, which be constituted as a way of elaborating a different way of organizing the social differentiated from the normal body politics. This rather this is an act of a new form of social organization, and there's no gruesome analogy arguments either. Malahaku and will about Harold 18 Afro-Pessimism errors like gruesome analogy confuses multiculturalism with the informed solidarity politics and coheres with black revolution and constantly calls for blacks existence of anti-black racism and non-black movements is neither new nor shocking. This does not preclude lines or not lead to rejection of solidarity. The claim of POC are only entered in the appeals of whiteness, anti-blackness, police, the history of racial imperialism, the world of slavery, and prior to categories, rules, and rule. The allow fiction to dictate how we tell the story is disingenuous. Market disingenuous. The alternative is not mutually exclusive to the app. It says it requires new modes of methods of researching and teaching and undoing the racial calculus and political arithmetic that are entrenched. Only we solve this. It proves legal action is key. Their Salihana evidence also agrees with it argues that the ways in which the white supremacy is a Ponzi scheme and captures black folk into its system of violence is through things like over-policing of communities.
Karthik, can you hop on a call and then we can run a little bit of prep first before cross-sex?
All right. Yeah.
Are we doing 8 or 10 minutes of prep? Just so I know.
I'm good with 8.
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna call you. Starting prep. A minute used.
All right, let me just pull the timer for crosstalks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I am good.
You good? All right. All right. Time starting now. I guess my first question is about civil asset forfeiture. So how do communities actually repeal that?
They can say,
How are communities?
you are no longer allowed to just steal stuff from people when you go to arrest them, or if you are doing police work, because they
Right.
can, one, ban police in the first place, which means people can't do that because then it's just people
Through
breaking into
what?
each other's
Like,
homes.
Through like the plan spilling over? Like,
That's our whole argument about communities will divest from police. They're doing it now. The only reason it's not effective is because the
All right.
feds keep pumping money into
so
them.
okay. So like, what are the warrants for like it actually spilling over? Because what the Bennett card says, it gives a lot of assertions about what should be done, but it actually doesn't. I don't see a warrant for it giving like a mechanism for these things.
Yeah, that's the 4 internal link cards. You read the Harmon Weaver, the 2 pieces of Harmon 15 evidence, and the Schenck evidence. So the first piece of evidence argues that budgetary accountability, local communities feel strapped because the only way they get federal funds that are necessary for things like, healthcare funding or emergency funding for like other social safety nets are dependent on maintaining law and order and ratcheting up crime. Divestment from the federal level from police means that those restrictions no longer get put on aid, which forces them into the false choice of increasing police budgets.
Caitlin, why is that true? Why is that sort of ending of federal funds means that sort of condition on other forms of funds goes away?
That's what divestment means.
Wait,
that's what our evidence defines divestment as, not only getting rid of the monetary resources that go to the police, but also the policies that allow for the protection of police resources. So our Bennett evidence, as well as I forget the piece of evidence after it, outlines that it gets rid of things like the capacity for the 1033 program to transfer military goods and surveillance goods to them for JAG appropriation to be able to support kind of initiatives for law and order, to funds public-private partnerships. That's the only ways that local communities get investments, et cetera, et cetera.
That's fine.
The second internal link talks about budgetary independence.
Caitlin, I want to move on. So can we talk about like the first piece of like Harmon evidence? I guess talking about how civil asset forfeiture would lead to these policing units being self-sustaining.
What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so basically what the card talks about is how federal programs provide officer salaries, but then these basically asset forfeitures can be used to cover the cost of like operations and stuff. So like, what is like how much money exactly does the federal government provide for officer salaries, and would that be able to be made up by civil asset forfeiture?
I mean, it kind of depends on the state, but like overall, it's like in like the 20s of billions of dollars. So like, no.
So it can't.
Because like local people don't have that much money.
Wait, that doesn't.
Like I'm talking about all 50 states. Like so, like
combined.
New York gets like $2 billion. Like California gets like.
But like 3. Based on. Right, but like for each
time,
local.
By the way.
Okay, all right.
But you can ask if you want.
Yeah,
I assume you're taking prep, so.
I mean.
Okay. Can you send the 2NC card? Actually, I can. I was gonna ask if you. Okay, cool. I saved it to Dropbox. So I didn't realize I had Dropbox working on this. Did everyone get the cards?
Yep. I guess I'm not everyone. I'm myself. I got them.
Okay. Karthik, you good?
Give me. All right, I have them.
Cool. So the order is going to be the K. It'll have an overview at top. You can choose to fill that on a separate page, but if you left space at the top, you should be fine. Is everyone good?
All right. The key outweighs in Turin's case that blackness is not ontological, rather exists in the excess of ontology. Blackness is not something static, but rather it must be read in absolute dereliction to humanity. No grammar in order for civil society can cohere. Bill Paths said blackness is opposition to humanity, and when new ways of grammar proliferate to explain the world, it always relied on the captivity of blackness in order for it to maintain coherence. None of their evidence will get to answering this fundamental symbiotic question that proves that even the reforms happen will never be able to disentangle the way that criminality is always already described as a hieroglyphic upon black slash that makes violence inevitable. Filter presumption differently than you would in normal debate. They would have to win by the affirmative, which is the structure of violence rather than isolating an instance of violence, because time and time again snapshots of progress have been weaponized to justify more innocuous forms of captivity. That's the Salehana and Sharp evidence. The alternative is an analytical wage work that instead of attempting to provide a solution to the problem of anti-blackness rejects the political risk of prescribing solutions. That moment you pose the question of saying no to government create the ability to create the appearance for to open its way within debate. That's the Sharp evidence. Remember, you can't change the state, but you can change the state of debate. That's a prerequisite to solve their office at Harvard 2020. President of the critical state, when I can afford it, as the state is president, department is much for the rule, condition, violation of regulation of eradication of black or way or this other prefigured projects of features of you also said about the epistemic revolution, the issue, continue radical literature, politics, internal political practice. Go to drop down the framework, counter-interpretation, evaluate the what is he as a scholarly artifact. The affirmative should have to defend the epistemological foundation of the plan before evaluating the risk of solving. The affirmative has to win by talking about the affirmative outweighs the link argument. A, winning framework changes the way you evaluate competition. Representation becomes a litmus test for evaluating the affirmative versus the alternative. They do not get away the field at risk of their offense against the critique, but they do get away by talking about the what is he is a good idea. It's predictable, fair, reciprocal. The affirmative gets away the representation, research model, ethical framework together. Criticism, they necessarily have to research the things in order to make the affirmative. The question of reform versus pessimism is one of the biggest core controversies on the CGR topic, which is why they should have been prepared for it. B, in anti-black education, decide the one repeated practice of presenting in speech activities, give way to parasitic spaces, naturalizing white imagination, only challenging the underlying epistemology that shapes is able to mitigate violence and anti-black activity. That comes prior. There's no reason to uphold the game if the game is anti-black seeds and the advocacy schools that that question of the CGR mandate actively contributing to a form of racial battle fatigue. It is necessary to move from contingency to a paradigm for why/how violence offers this Douglas and all something. How do you see the language makes their black people relationship releasing hostility from other active efforts, but the give language for relationship with the black people institution started exploring radicals and right or white right there are not applicable to black cells. Jesus like violence is not solved. It's empty. Proper dysfunction of the damage sexes of health contribution RBF cardiovascular disease right out the bodies via stressors. They say fairness. No, you devolved me to a 5-second plan. Take only our interpretation for to defend all evidence of the one to see beats reciprocally affirmed against infinite prep damage to the 2AC spin and see if we're winning a link argument. If we're winning a link argument, unfairness is good. That's Warren 11. The students are privileged to experience memory after this increase an opportunity to change perspective, good plan, losing good after keeping a reason, cognitive dissonance, that is our teaching moment. This advocacy skills seeds us the argument that debate does have an impact on subjectivity, meaning that if we win a link argument, the end point of their advocacy skills is still anti-blackness. They say movement building will impact during the end point of the movement building with Douglas, but will also impact during the process with an iconography that's out of William 16. Different political different legal empathy, with the serial with the need to react to our government house society evacuate for factory religion, grievances and public works initial work that already did the visual work to jeopardize our meaningful movies and iconography of black anime Greek as grievance and iconographic construction outweighs in terms of office of William City. Careless resolution that is listening to resource religious circuit federal responsibility of lives ever paid within grievances strong well back in the morning getting grievances of GK carry your belly out of trauma. At first, the first is the archivism. This functions on two levels. A, at the level of the one you see, their move to cherry pick certain bits and pieces of Black Vision Collective as proof of radicality of the affirmative is the way that they have co-opted that labor of those working on the front lines for their own political agenda. Insert one AC arc bar 18, but B, at the level of the two AC, if we win that they're also so negative in the direction of alternative, it's proof of them only engaging with Black authors insofar as it can be mobilized for their redemptive end. Think of this as a pick out of the two AC. It's predictable because you chose what cards you're reading against the case. You know our strategy. You should be able to defend why the cards you represent. The impact of support of Trump fungibility. Think about MLK codes get circulated, obviously against more radical position, reduces blackness to a commodity to be utilized only as far as is productive for the affirmative political project. Externally construct what we understand as the good versus bad for Black that results in state crackdown. Think of the BPP who the government utilized to claim that a free breakfast program was that radical while simultaneously making it more difficult for Black ones to access it and then cast the path to the terror organization to make state engagement the horizon of liberation struggle and drop down to the permutation. All links are independent. Descend to the permutation separate to the voting issue for fairness and education. Just make to conditionality and Hunter's argument of responsibility. We have 5 additional link arguments. A is exceptional policing. The one he sees understanding of exceptional, the one he sees understanding of police violence that is different from schools, hospitals, etc. Often sees the mundane violence, i.e. SROs and hospital police are still part of hospital budgets, still exist post-staffing, gain more funding, proving the affirmative legitimized form of violence to kill more black folks than the police under being for the black community, which means we outweigh on scope. That's the motive evidence. Beat the abuser road. Instead of reforming the CGS that testifies systematically black to white supremacy, the same logic that makes folks stay with their abuser, i.e. there's abuser practice happening now, police violence followed by the gifting of the abuser road to show that it can be changed, so defunding the police, then circumventing to remove new forms of legally sanctioned violence. Framing issue only arsenally Hannah evidence is about out examples of the affirmative tracking how slavery was followed by reconstruction, then the rise of the KKK, the police, and the lynching, then came the Civil Rights Act that led to COINTELPRO, the war on drug crime, and the racial violence. These will continue to coerce for black folks to still maintain a system of government. Sees the welfare queen says the one he sees investing more money into black communities the way that he gets stigmatized and overly reliant on government handouts just to make track. Think about how radio weapons and triple welfare queens are just like social service certificates, but externally mobilized under a precarious public anxiety that justified the murder of black women under guise of stealing tax dollars. See the HAP that said the money constructs that ethical veneer around policing that under our local control pigs will be held accountable. That's not true. The affirmative doesn't change things like qualified immunity that allows the police to claim that they failed to justify violence. Historically, cops like George Zimmerman, Brett Hankson, and Jerry Chauvin doing illegal shit, but ghetto free and local politicians crack down harder. That's Emerson 07. Local politicians creative proceed get on tough politicians on the of criminal punishment. And E, here's a gut check. The sort of affective moment that the affirmative utilizes to emulate or to harm is bad. That's King 19. I thought participation around the violence of police and performs that advantage the question. How did I say black city really have black cities being left like and being misguided liberal sort of Mr. Kiev complex of profit has been possessing leisure for the formation of Julian body without organization to interrupt the impulse to objectify black life. All the responses for permutation to both respond to the other permutation. Gordon's going to be the one in R. The Salihana stuff was done above and occurred. This is proof of this is the way that we've evolved. Like patrols for policing proof of historically affirmative is vacuous. The Kelly Cartwheel street turned it's in line with our Salihana evidence. Not one to justify the use of state slash reform. Yes, we agree that slavery to Jim Crow to the pig is all proof of the weakness of society, but our Salihana evidence is the way it sustained itself through the continued investment and reform that justifies understanding white supremacy is being too strong and that we need to work within it. But only through a process of the alternative are we able to expose that. If anything, it's proof that reform gets rolled back. The Moten Hardy group them, they're all wrong. Its impact turned this quote discussion on defunding the police because necessitates more policy, i.e. reinvest in other area, which the impact turns above. The Carter evidence wrong. They still have to respond to the Porter tripping link about the specific modalities in which they mobilize their politics. And Malaklu falls negative. Sees that non-black folks should submit to the black antagonist in Malaklu 18. African conceptual public suffer from a human antagonist, religion, black and paradigm, analysis, liberal code for holding the human submit themselves to package antagonism, coming to research black future disease. This house that is not called the same black as the president of human recognition. The alternative stuff is a specific refusal of the sort of political hope and political investment that they have talked about, which is why their sort of cherry picking of the quotes at the bottom is not in line with really what Sharp and Salihana are talking about, but is another proof of how they link back to the archivism that I did at the top of the debate.
All right, just give me a second to pull up my timer. All right, I want to ask about this last argument, this rereading of Malawaku. Why do you not think that the AF submits itself to the antagonism of blackness?
Well, because then it would cede our ontology arguments as being true, which then...
Wait, why? Not all black folk agree that anti-blackness is positioned in ontological dispossession, so
you're right.
That seems like you're homogenizing black thought, which is
incorrect. The Malaklu evidence is hyper-specific to the distinction between conflict and antagonism that's drawn from Wilderson's work, right? So her argument is that then the sort of role for non-black scholars engaging in academia is to submit to the antagonism, which means to submit to the understanding of blackness as being ontological.
That's not how she defines it, but that's fine. That will be later in the debate. The kind of king evidence, I guess, what does it mean to have this like effectual moment of reprieve? Like, what does that mean for
so the king evidence says two things. One is that the sort of discussions of how to save black life has become the status quo in normative academia debates. Our argument is that then instead we need a pause from action and a break from those discussions, instead to focus on the way that our desires can sort of be interrogated. This is then an impact.
I guess, why is that not just as true of y'all's engagement and alignment with the analytic of wake work as non-black folk?
Right. So the King argument makes a distinction between the idea of, sort of engaging in action and rather studying non-black desire, which is sort of her argument about wedding yourself to chaos.
How do we distinguish?
Right. So
right. I want to ask, I have more context for that.
Right.
So like the vision for Black lives says like the way to mediate on the antagonism of anti-blackness is to engage in things like gestures towards abolition, including things like divesting from the police. You argue that the way to do it is to align with the analytic of wage work and reject state politics. Like, how do we ever decide between those two things? Like, what does it mean for us as non-black folk to decide what black folk are asking us to do? How do we come to that decision?
Well, the answer to that is really easy, right? The idea that,
oh no, my internet keeps cutting out. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. You good?
Yeah. So my question just ended, which is like, how do we decide between what black folk are asking us, non-black?
Right. So our argument is that there's obviously a distinction between what's going on the front lines and the way we sort of debate about things in debate. Our argument is that which is what the specificity of our King argument is that in the context of debate, right, and in the context of academic discussions, we shouldn't forward the question of how to save Black studies, but instead focus on how we sort of discuss those things in the first place.
Wait, question. Why is that not what the K's question of the 1AC? You have said you have not approached the question of anti-blackness, right? We need to save it in this new way. Why are you not that analogy?
So King is making that distinction about the will to action towards the will to understanding and analysis. That is the distinction between the affirmative's call for more reform and action within academic settings towards a study of desire and representations within the way we discuss about anti-blackness in the space. That is the distinction.
That's fine. That's fine. Karthik, can you send it out? Jasmine, I like that you're just mad chilling on the couch. Alright, I am good whenever.
Good.
Everyone else is.
All right. Cool. Yeah, so order, Gordon case. Everybody good? Yep, okay. Gordon disagrees with liberal political philosophy and instead advocates for other modes of sociality that are in line with revolutionary politics. Gordon 16, the current struggles of oxygen, even humanity, person, devastating critique of liberal political philosophy, Black liberation demands transcend that impasse. And he agrees with our argument that the ascription of criminality of Blackness. Gordon 02, to be Black calls for close possibilities to be too Black to always be guilty. No bad evidence can establish innocence. And even if humanism can be good, Gordon concedes that Blackness lacks the ability to be right as humans. Gordon 02, good and evil are regarded as material embodiments of white and Black people wherever. Black stands with the humanity stuck into the void and comes to realize that the rules of the game no longer apply. And Gordon disagrees with their interpret of progress and concludes that revolution is needed, not reformism. Their politics continues a form of colonial mimesis. Gordon 02, for progress to be one of the meanings of history has to descend in history as live, suffer, and suffer progress. If Black soil would be heard as a cry, it would not be a Black one. For a Black man, there's nothing but destiny in his white revolutionary considerations needed that stands outside of white superiority. And Gordon still flows negative. Even if they win the sort of humanism claim, Gordon would definitely not advocate for political hope. Warren 15, looking for what type of work will bring about the promises of political that will alleviate black suffering, the struggles the person has, the spiritual virtue necessitates living in, what Lewis Gordon will call bad faith. And Gordon is wrong and violent and prefers pathologization. You should vote next to refuse the bad faiths of the ass rhetoric. An amendment pick out of Gordon. Section 19, Gordon's misreading of Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Gordon's calling its object of criticism an unreasonable fanatic, patronizing and condescends by saying Afro-pessimism formulated with good intentions conceits by pushing himself on the side of moral superiority, casting Afro-Pez as enemies, presents bad faith back from the fold of true black radical tradition. Rather, Pez does not assume its own moral superiority. Rather, it takes seriously the dissatisfaction with the way of the problem and action is framed in the first place. On a case, defunding the police doesn't solve, turns their movements off and extends to week 20. The political vacuum left post-staff creates reforms that strengthen the power of the police, which is proof of how post-staff they strengthen the police under a more innocuous name. But also on the level of presumption, they've conceded that the budget cuts get rolled back once the movement's petered out. Their only response is that this is going to be fiat. But that's proof of our framework offense about how their model of fiat relies on utopic futures that don't actually have, which turns their legal education offense. Next, defunding. No local defunding, not inevitable. The propaganda or evidence is the context of the scope and not a predictive claim that these movements will grow. Continue. This is doubled by the fact that media attention to the protests are waning now, so there's even less of an impetus for the states to act. But even if they do win, that defunding happens as part of the movement, as severe evidence proves that once again the movement stops, these things will get ruled back. Like predatory policing. Their Crockett and Earl evidence definitely flows negative. It says that by sapping funds from the police creates a shift towards predatory policing, such as civil asset forfeiture, where they double down on criminalization, such that they can steal the property of black and brown communities and sell it for profit. This means that the act's radicalism is the facetious point to intensify systems of policing. That outweighs because the police crack down even harder on black and brown communities and will literally steal money, which means that even if they reallocate funds via reinvestment in the community, on net more money is being drained out, exacerbating the root cause of the problem via their evidence. If you go back to Crossix when they said that civil asset forfeiture couldn't solve for the operational costs, they cited figures such as 20 billion, some 10 billions of dollars, but they failed to recognize how many police departments there are in the United States and how those funds are getting split up. It's absolutely possible for a local police department to gain more funds through predatory policing and civil asset forfeiture when we don't even know, when there's an arbitrary amount of money being given to each community for officer salaries. And they claim that they end civil asset forfeiture. No, they don't. Their evidence concludes that civil asset forfeiture abolition must be included in the larger movement to defund the police, but not the claim that defunding the police ends civil asset forfeiture. That's the whole point. Next, on the Hansford evidence, you made a technical concession to their Harman evidence that says, quote, it allows local police to become self-sustaining and achieve budgetary independence from local governments. And the bottom part of their Harman evidence says that local governments can serve as democratic control over police practices. Federal programs undermine the system, which just proves how they create a shift to community policing. And this is impact turned by the 1NC Hansford 16 was saying that this move to provide community accountability over policing is strict to expand systems of anti-black violence. The democratic tone of community oversight is proof of the cruel optimism offense because only the police only selectively choose who they listen to, strategically excluding youth of color, low-income single mothers, and former prisoners in favor of white elites. It expands police violence under an ethical guise. Door-to-door surveys become excuse for warrantless searches of homes. Child registration becomes tool to intimidate family. This turns their argument of greater accountability. See, community members do not know the perverse incentive that fuel the police to community sort because of a way to disavow criticism of violent practices. Town meetings become a site for police propaganda that quelled movements against the police. Onto police unions. The AF only has jurisdiction over federal policing and
Karthik.
Yeah.
Do the SCOTUS stuff about preventing the community from repealing civil asset forfeiture.
All right. Because the Supreme Court has set the definition of what civil asset forfeiture is, and they have ruled that is legal, which means that community things get struck down by SCOTUS. They haven't given the only definition of civil asset forfeiture they have given is outside of fiat of their plan, which means that the SCOTUS will basically strike down any law outside of it.
All right, I'm going to take a couple minutes.
Karthik, you want to hop on a call?
Yeah.
All right, I have 608 left.
Sorry, how much time do you have left?
608.
Okay, sounds good.
1 second. All right, sorry about that. There's no document. All right, sorry about that. No doc, it will be case and then the K. All right, is anyone not ready? Awesome. Conceded federal support of police causes an creation of 130% of state-sanctioned violence. Only the AFFIR is able to reject that, which is a good idea. That's only the sufficient reason we have to vote for AFF, which is able to solve. Our evidence also indicates that full divestment from the police requires federal support. Is the only way to get rid of the perception that policing and law and order are necessary for maintaining of community safety, which kind of answers all of their socialist arguments about the investments in the idea of policing in general, which proves that the AFF is the first step to be able to solve and gesture towards broader changes away from to abolition and changes away from the punitive system of the policing system. They have no critique or example for why the AFF doesn't solve this outside of vague notions of, well, obviously they don't do this. We've read evidence that indicates that it is effective, and there is a predictive claim that local communities are forced into a false choice where they only support policing and those practices because the federal government conditions funds on the idea that they need to increase law and order. Divestment by design is not just a removal of resources, but a removal of the perception and the need for policing in the first place, which are what I see evidence outlines, which is all defended, which they have no reason why we're not able to solve with their first argument. This wiki evidence conceded the re-highlighting of it indicates the only reason that local communities are reinvesting in police is because they're forced into a false choice by Republican Senate members not being able to decrease or not leveraging emergency funds by saying they have to increase policing. Only the plan's able to solve it. They say no local defunding. I did the first internal link above. Second, we're able to solve because the capacity for police to be able to negotiate and leverage larger budgets requires federal support and their ability to remove themselves from community oversight. It requires things like militarization, the increase in 1033 grants, JAG funds, etc., that allow them to pressure and antagonize local community members into voting against them. The idea that local community members don't know how community policing works or how predatory these practices are is patronizing, and it's probably a double turn with all of their arguments about return to it away from state control, because it argues that local people just have no idea what they're doing, which also probably turns them to the archivism decide because they've patronized black folk by saying they don't know what community policing practices they should resist. Their civil asset forfeiture argument only we're able to solve divestment for the police requires a change on the federal scale for how they understand support of policing. If SCOTUS ruled that civil asset forfeiture is illegal, federal divestment would result in removing those things or pressure to do that, which is what all of our AFFIR evidence is able to help. They've not limited the scope of fiat insolvency. We've explained the internals of how these things all legislative should work, which means we should get access to them. They've also conceded durable fiat is a reason to vote AF because it's we should have to outline the conditions of would the plan happen, but should, because it's aligning with radical black visions, which is all of our AFFIR evidence. The SCOTUS decision answered about their federal divestment able to solve their next piece of evidence about community policing is just a term misinterpretation. Our evidence, community policing is active police in communities. We divest from police. We say they should not exist. Communities should have oversight to prevent police from going into communities, which proves that we're able to solve until they prove a term difference or that we actually do that it's not office from the K proper. First, I'll start with the extension of the Gordon evidence. It answers their overview. The anti-blackness is not a closed system, but rather is fragile and dependent on the institutions and policies that support them, that create the justification and social animus towards blackness, which proves that changing the political structures and things that justify what law and order and safety in the community is has a reverse causal effect of changing anti-black behaviors and ideologies. Any idea outside of this closes anti-blackness as an inevitable structure and results in the inevitable violence against black individuals. Our evidence indicates it forecloses the possibility for the radical black tradition because it says that those movements towards recognition or calls for legal change are ultimately debunked and something that people should not move toward, which denies the very lived reality of black folk every day, which proves they link to all their archives and activist has and speaking it down. Their next argument that we can't change the state, but we can change the state of debate is hopeless. Our framework argument indicates that the ballot is only a decision of whoever does the better debating and not an indication of your own subjectivity or ability for activism, which proves only our framework interpretation is able to solve the role of the judge to be to weigh the fiat implication of the affid versus a competitive alternative. You should evaluate your decision through the scope of who solves their impacts better, not how just can the negative generate links. That's self-serving and arbitrary and makes a moving target, makes it impossible for the app to generate offense and kind of localize our clash, which they agree is a bad idea because they made a severance argument on the permutation. It's the only way to actualize any of their education or fair call evidence indicates that only nuanced clash is able to be able to challenge anti-blackness in education, which they will solve, which also proves that all their unfairness arguments are made in bad faith because they presume that we're fair to them and we not sever our representations, which proves that they're just a moving target to find something wrong with the 1AC rather than being an actual criticism of the quote-unquote anti-black underpinnings of the 1AC, which means you should reject them. They've not impact turn our movements, our visions for Black lives indicate that Black folk are calling for things like divestment of the police as a way to mobilize resources to have broader gestures towards abolition that can dismantle things like prison industrial complex, nonprofit industrial complex, and the military industrial complex. Only the AFA aligns with that vision is able to solve all their arguments. Ultimately come down to is you chose the wrong Black folk, which is just as pathologization as all of their offense. There's no reason ontologic nature is able to solve Pixar a voting issue, makes it impossible to be 1AC, makes it a moving target. I impacted this on the framework debate, which means you should reject their pick out of the 1AC as well as all the ontologies that answers above. There's no exceptionalization of policing argument. We'd argue that policing is a social argument, which only the AF is able to resolve.
Karthik, you want to call? And we'll run.
Okay, I'm done. I just need to go. I just need to go grab water real quick. Okay.
The 2 and R. Yeah.
Can y'all hear me still?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. So the order is going to be first it's going to be the K and then case.
The neg and then the F.
Yeah. Everyone good? The one is a cruelly optimistic attachment to political hope that attempts to cherry pick the certain archives of certain movements in order to justify its supposed radicality while simultaneously pathologizing those that it picks. First is the ontology debate. They have considered that blackness is not static but be read in their relation to humanity and all grammar further in order for civil society to gain coherence, because middle passage said blackness is opposition to humanity, and when new ways of grammar proliferate and rely on the captivity of blackness in order to maintain coherence, this filters the way you understand the reform debate, because even if you resolve that affirmative solves in this isolated instance, only our theory accounts for the long-term trajectory of the affirmative reform and maintaining systems of anti-blackness. They didn't answer the semiotic question, which means that our office necessarily come prior. But this is proven by the concession of two key link arguments. The first is the abuser's rose dissent that was contextualized by the Saleh-Hana evidence that indicated that the 1AC the reforming the CGS intensified system of anti-blackness and white supremacy. It's the same logic. It's the same logic that makes folks stay with their abuser, i.e., there's an abusive practice happening out. Police files followed by the gifting of an abuser rose to show that can be changed, which is defunding the police, then circumvented through new legally sanctioned by the vows. They've dropped the framing issue that are just out examples them about how after slavery was followed by Reconstruction, and then the rise of the KKK, the police, and the lynching that came to the Civil Rights Act that led to court of the war on drugs, privatized prisons, racialized violence need to continue in order to continue to coerce black folks. But they've considered the way that we've articulated the specific context of the 1AC about how the policing arrived from fugitive slave patrols, which means that absent a reckoning with the ontological question of anti-blackness, it means that their politics will then inevitably be circumvented. Investing in forms of cruel optimism that'll impact out a little bit later. But the second argument they've considered is just the welfare we just said that I don't think received any 1 yard coverage. That the 1AC investment of more money into black communities is the way that they get stigmatized and overly relied on government handouts that then justified their crackdown. Think to how Reagan weaponized the triple welfare crews to justify cutting social services, which turned the case, but externally is mobilized in a precarious public anxiety that justifies the murder of black women under the guise of them stealing our taxes, which is then proof of the way that they sort of that the 1AC's political project is then a reinvestment in cruel hope. You should read our They should flip the way you understand the affirmative is a step in the right direction because they've conceded the threshold for voting negative or presumption should be lowered to the affirmative has to prove why it changes the structural condition of blackness because snapshots of progress are weaponized to expand captivity. Their only argument is that we make good the evil perfect, and while that may sound Africanly appealing, our theory has questioned what actions they come to define as good. You should read an alternative of Wakefield is largely a framework push to divest from their model of debate that is when it's a political arithmetic of prescribing solution because the ability to say no in the face of our demand for policy offers a cognitive reference that creates the ability to create sense of care and spiritual hope into the wake of this debate. This is what Sharp explains the role for non-black folks in our article, Losing Your Kid, that says in order to create a more accountable discussion, especially on the CGR topic where every discussion is permeated about the way the black and brown folks are criminalized, non-black folks need to hold each other accountable for the hidden representation that drives the way the discussion is held, which means that then our model allows for the questioning of the one who sees epistemic orientation that is able to open the space for discussion about the way our desires get mobilized and the slippages in our practices, extend our counter-interpretation about the one who sees scholarly artifact, the affirmative defend the epistemological foundation of the platform for valid rigorous of solvency. The affirmative to win by talking about the affirmative outweighs the link arguments. They try to go for the clash impact, but drop our defense on fairness. They've dropped that that our interpretation is predictable and fair because the affirmative gets away the representation research model and ethical frameworks against the critique, which they necessarily have to research to make the affirmative. But even more damning, they've conceded the question of reform versus pessimism is the biggest core controversy on the CGR topic, which means that they should have already been able to predict it, which means that they don't get, which means that we internally turn their class offense. But the conception of the solvent evidence loses them this debate. That political hope is psychologically depleting and violent, causing psychic violence, wearing down the body, causing cardiovascular disease, which means that then their model of fiat politics and embracement of utopian hope and the idea that government will magically reform itself is then parasitic on black folks in this space. They've considered too much technical office to win this debate. They've dropped the cherry picking argument. The affirmative is just one isolated instance of the movement writ large and used that to justify the politics. They've dropped the PPP, BBP example, that internal link to their offense on movement because it says that because they think of the way that sort of BBP, who the government utilized to claim that their free breakfast program was now radical while simultaneously making more difficult for black mothers to access it, and then cast the Panthers as a terror organization to make state engagement the horizon of liberation struggle, which is proof of our argument about the way when they cherry pick certain instances of the movement, they claim it's a prerequisite for the grander abolitionism, is the way that they sort of get pathologized and co-opted within the confines of the state, and the broader movement is then quelled, which internal link to a lot of their state engagement could off. Their proof, their argument about we're cherry picking is not. Our argument is that the way they have chosen to choose specific aspects of the movement to justify their entire politics is what we've impacted her. We're not a floating pick. Reject the argument, not the team. It's not a reason. The Kelly evidence, they dropped the straight turn of it, that yes, it's proof about the weakness of civil society, but that weakness is only cohered because of reformism, which is the Salehana evidence that loses in this debate. Look, conceding Sullivan means that they don't have offense that outweighs us.
All right, I have 608. I will use the rest of that once I set it. All right, starting now. All right, that is time. The order will be the case and then the critique. Is anyone not ready? All right, awesome. Consideration of the case means you vote off the AF resulted in a 130% decrease in police violence at minimum and at best a gesture towards full abolition of the prison industrial complex, military industrial complex, and non-profit industrial complex. They conceded the activation of the vision for Black lives by starting with the divestment for the police is necessary to be able to activate the material changes that are able to challenge the capacity of the United States federal government, which is able to solve. They've also conceded the most important piece of evidence, the Harmon interlink that indicates there's a perceptual change once divestment from the federal level occurs that prevents the need and attitude towards active policing and the need to establish law and order, which is the whole argument of their semiotics thesis about why anti-blackness is inevitable, is a direct refutation of that relationship, which proves that only the AF is a gesture that's able to solve. All we have to prove is the AF is a good idea, not it is a perfect idea, or that it solves all of anti-blackness in order to win, which is just a threshold we have met that they have not met the burden of negating. It's able to solve. Now the K proper, first, they have not extending a permutation was an active choice. We have impact turned their critique at the level of how it understands its theorization and an approach to blackness. They have conceded that we have specific nuanced interlinks that explain why the action of divesting for the police is effective, and all their response to this was a generic cruel optimism argument with gestures to the circumvention debate will prove and never get to the circumvention debate, which means you should not evaluate a large portion of their offense because they've just not applied it specifically to the AF, which means you shouldn't fall into the argument that they have just can blatantly apply it to be able to solve because it's made in bad faith criticism because they have no reason why we do not align with the calls or actions towards materially improving the lives of Black folk, especially because they have no argument for why we've cherry-picked the movement when we've continuously proven that divesting the police is in line with the actions. Now, at the top level, the gore piece of evidence impact turns their alignment of the alt and their understanding of anti-blackness as an inevitable semiotic commodity. It argues that we should instead understand as anti-blackness is constituted through the combination of social perceptions as structured by the political interventions and what is considered legal or a proper way of existing in the world. This understands anti-blackness is not a finished or closed cis project, but rather something that is open and fragile that can be challenged at the level of the Black radical tradition. The critique is what encloses an understanding of anti-blackness and completes its process by ontologizing it or understanding it as always in a descriptor of the black flesh within a political or social space, which prevents the capacity for radical agency or action to be able to challenge, which is antithetical with their wake work alternative, which goes unexplained in the QNR, which is something that you should call attention to because it proves that they have no way of remedying their own understanding of semiotic intrusion. Well, we have an explanation for the social deconstruction of anti-blackness at the level of legal analysis. Our Gordon evidence as well as the Kelly evidence, which they said they straight term, but the Gordon evidence impact turns that straight turns, argues that only understanding the historical and social context for devaluation of Black lives and how it is placed in captivity is able to understand the ways in which we can unravel and challenge those systems of anti-blackness. We must first start at the question of how policy constitutes. Their Salehana evidence is the example of how the AF solves their whole semiotic thesis. It says over policing of communities, things like the war on drugs, COINTELPRO, federal investment in the capture of blackness is what drives anti-blackness and the Ponzi scheme of white supremacy. The AF divests from all those things, which proves we're able to solve this, which proves that they had to have won a circumvention debate in order to win the variety of it, which answers all their ontology arguments and their distinctions about being semiotic and not. Their welfare queen dissad was answered on case, even if it was not directly referred to. Our evidence is not just throwing money at the problem, but is returning agential capacity to local communities. They are not able to have oversight or control over their own notion of safety or community in the status quo because federal funds and militarization through things like the 1033 program, JAG funds, as well as conditioning aid and resources like health infrastructure on increasing policing and active policing is what drives the lack of community autonomy. Only the AF is able to reestablish that and able to solve, which proves it's beyond just throwing the money and making them dependent on the federal government. It's returning power to communities themselves, which is something they have not answered. Now, the framework debate proper, we don't lock out any of their epistemological considerations of the 1AC, so all their arguments about clash being better or not preventing challenges of anti-Black education are just simply not true, but rather our argument is that the comparison of the fiated nature of of the AF versus a competitive alternative requires you to evaluate the strength of those links through the alternatives posed to solve them. Only we have explained the nuanced reasons why divestment from the police is able to solve our conception of anti-blackness and kind of how it operates to cause terrorism on a wide scale through the arm of policing. They have not explained an alternative or a reason why they solve their epistemological considerations, which proves that they're made in bad faith because they're just trying to find one reason why the AF is bad instead of actually having a concentrated challenge of challenging and mediating on the antagonism of anti-blackness, which proves that they cause all their racial battle fatigue arguments. Only we are able to solve it and avoid these things by engaging in things like legalistic practice and nuanced interpretations of how these things are able to solve. Also, we've impact turned the idea that pragmatism results in racial battle fatigue, so it's not conceded. Good debate, everyone. Yay!
Good debate.
That was really good. I really enjoyed it.
Hey,
That was a messy 2 hours.
can y'all hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah?
Yep.
Excellent. Freddie, can you? All right, I'm trying to see if I can hear. I can't hear y'all.
Yeah, we were muted.
No, we're
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, perfect. I can hear y'all. All right. I feel so juiced. I was in and out of that debate doing some promo stuff, of course. But how y'all feeling? Good? Feeling like $1 million? Love to.
I feel old.
Yo.
I feel like I need to do more redos.
I'm so sweaty right now. It's gross.
Oh, same.
Well, you know that the redo factory is open for tomorrow. So, you know, definitely be part of office hours with us. But for folks who are watching, we're going to wait on Jacqueline, who's going to come up with an RFD. Jacqueline, how long do you think you would need to come up with that?
Probably like 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay. So we'll let you sit back and do that. And what I'll do is I'm gonna stop this record and then just get this record just so that uploading, this is gonna be interesting to upload onto YouTube for how long it is. But y'all, this was the demo of a student demo debate. Our students work real hard all 2 weeks to kind of have these moments to engage us as a staff and to really try out their arguments and just kill it, honestly. It takes something for us to kind of come back in the ring, and as Caitlan said, the sweat is real.
I had to move all the fans off of me so you could hear me.
Yeah.
Debate, man.
But we super are appreciative for everyone who watches this. And like I said, if this seems to be your steez, come join myself, Caitlan, Jacob, who's not pictured, and other folks who have bought in to Debate Boutique to come debate us and help us work with you and build your argumentation so that we have this little boutique community growing and growing and growing. With that, the next video is going to be the Jacqueline RFD. So if that's something that intrigues you for how she decided this debate, stay tuned.